Did you know that today is the 27th Capital Day, Cape at the Capitol event? No. Well, you're helping participate in the 27th time that homeschoolers have come to the Capitol, at least, to really meet your legislators, to talk with them about homeschooling, and really put a face to what homeschooling is all about. All of these faces. Most of the legislators really excited about seeing families, people that they represent, and they particularly like seeing kids. So you guys, even though you think maybe you're not going to be speaking to anyone, you're playing an important role today in the 27th homeschool day here at the Capitol. Now, to some of you, this might not seem all that important, you know, the 27th Capitol Day, or even that long. After all, Santa Fe is the oldest capital city in the United States. It was, as I learned driving from the airport, established as a capital in Nuevo Mexico in 1610. So it's the oldest capital city in the United States. Did any of you know that? All right, well, you learned something like I did just yesterday. Now, I believe that one of the reasons that homeschooling families can experience the freedom that you do have here in New Mexico is because of Kate and families like you who've been coming to the Capitol for nearly 30 years. Now, coming to the Capitol to meet your legislators and to help them understand what private homeschooling is all about. Now, how many of you have come to the Capitol the first time today? This is the first time you've ever been? That's great. Definitely give yourself a round of applause. So it's great to see your family, and many of those of you who've been here before, to see the importance of coming to the Capitol. You're representing, as I said earlier, homeschooling families across this great state and helping educate your legislators just a little bit about homeschooling. So thank you for taking the time to come here today. Now, as most of you know, New Mexico has a rich history and culture. What you're doing is helping add to that culture of homeschooling here in New Mexico. And it's my hope that your efforts today will continue to help create a rich history of homeschooling freedom here in New Mexico. So why are we here today? Well, to protect homeschooling freedom. As most of you have heard, last year the New Mexico legislature passed House Bill 130. This bill increased the instructional hours required for public school students from 990 hours to 1,140 hours. Now, the summary of the bill, which I'll quote from, said this: an act relating to public school finance, creating the K-12 plus program, providing additional program units for public schools that increase the number of instructional days beyond 180 days for a 5-day school week, and more than 155 days for a 4-day school week, defining instructional hours and professional hours, and repealing the K-5 Plus Act and extended learning time program units. Now, I'm sure you caught that House Bill 130 was intended to deal with the instructional school hours for public schools in New Mexico. There was no mention of homeschoolers or even private school students in House Bill 130. Now, as we do every year with both CAPE and HSLDA, monitored legislation that's introduced every year. There was nothing in House Bill 130 that dealt with homeschool programs. So why are we talking about House Bill 130 after the fact? Well, because the Public Education Department, or PED, has now decided that they believe that those instructional hours that were passed in House Bill 130 that applies to public schools should now apply to homeschool programs here in New Mexico. Now, as some of you may already know, it was over the last summer, 2023, that CAPE first saw that the PED was attempting to add the hours to the list of items that they say are required for homeschool programs in New Mexico. Now, both CAPE and HSLDA immediately contacted the PED and objected to this addition. I wrote a letter to the PED on July 31st and pointed out that the public school code that deals with public school attendance doesn't require homeschool students or private school students to provide instruction for the same number of days, for the same number of hours as the public school. In my letter, I pointed out that the homeschool program must follow Section 22-12A-4 of the New Mexico Statutes Annotated. Now, this section says, a school-aged person shall attend school for at least the length of time of the school year that is established in the school-aged person's school district, charter school or private school. Now again, The phrase is the length of time of the school year. The term school year is defined in section 22-1-2 as the total number of contract days offered by the public school in a school district during a period of 12 consecutive months. Nothing about hours in that. So therefore, a homeschool program in New Mexico needs to provide instruction for at least the same number of days, not hours, of their local school district. Now, in our discussion so far with the PED, both CAPE and HSLDA pointed out that there was nothing in the legislative discussion about House Bill 130 that mentioned private schools, let alone homeschoolers. The bill was never intended to include homeschool programs. In addition, that bill says that up to 60 instructional hours for elementary students and 30 instructional hours for students in grade 7 or higher may be used for professional work hours. Now, under this provision, public schools can reduce the number of instructional hours to either 1,080 or 1,110 hours, depending on what grade level is for those professional work hours. So apparently, while the New Mexico PED believes that instructional hours apply to homeschool programs, the professional work hours do not. But I would say that this is an additional evidence that, again, House Bill 130 was not intended to apply to homeschoolers. Now finally, in section 22-2-80.1, that section's been around for many, many years. Now before the changes were made to House Bill 130, public school students were required to receive 990 hours of instruction in the elementary grades and 1,080 for grades 7 through higher. But those hours requirements never applied to homeschool students. The only change that House Bill 130 made to that section was to strike the word regular. Now that word regular is actually not found anywhere else in New Mexico law, and then we're just removing a word that didn't need to be included there. But it did nothing to add homeschoolers to those hours requirements. This section still only applies to public school students. So getting back to why we're here in the New Mexico legislature today, you have an opportunity to see and perhaps even talk with your legislators, or at least maybe some of their staff. You can share how homeschooling has benefited your family, your children. You can talk about how you have the opportunity to spend one-on-one time with your children, teaching them and seeing them how they grow in knowledge and understanding. Now, some of you may have already contacted your legislators about this attempt by the PED to place instructional hours on homeschool programs. While you visit your legislator's office today, you can mention this attempt to apply 130 from last year to homeschool families. Now, you don't need to go into all the reasons why this bill doesn't apply to homeschoolers, and we're not necessarily asking the legislators to do anything to fix. There's no legislative fix that's needed in this situation. But you can let your legislator know that you are concerned that the PED is attempting to interpret a bill that dealt with public school instructional hours to homeschool families, that they're overstepping their authority given them by the legislature and what was specifically passed in House Bill 130. If they express any interest in this issue, you can ask them to reach out to CAPE, or better yet, get their contact information and give that to CAPE so that they can follow up with them later. Now, one thing I would mention is this. Don't feel like you need to justify the number of hours of instruction that you provide to your children. If you're asked about hours, you can simply say that your focus is on teaching your children. That you spend whatever time is necessary for each child based upon their individual needs and abilities. I would also gently point out to a legislator that you have the freedom to spend whatever time it takes that your child needs to learn, and that you should not be subjected to the bureaucracy of the public school system. So again, I want to thank you for coming to the Cape at the Capitol event, and I strongly believe that New Mexico has continued to support homeschool freedom because of these events. The effort that you and your family have put in today to visit your legislators, to stop by their office, is extremely important. You are helping these legislators put a name and a face to homeschooling. Now, as was mentioned earlier, my name is TJ Schmidt. I'm one of the senior attorneys at the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. I've been at HSLDA for over 20 years, and it's been my privilege to serve families in New Mexico and 5 other states. Now, like many of you, I was homeschooled too. In fact, both my wife and I were homeschooled. You know, it seems like it was probably a long time ago. And it was. But like you, we are homeschooling our own children. I wish my kids could be here, but they may not have been able to fit on the plane that I came here. I have 9 children, and they age and range from 19 to surprise twins at the end of 11 months. But I'm grateful for the efforts that my parents took in educating me, in educating my wife, so that we could in turn could educate our own children at home. And I think it's been a great experience for me, and I hope it's been a great experience for my children in our homeschooling journey. So for those of you who are here, I again really appreciate the effort. And as you kids are being homeschooled, I hope one day that maybe some of you will be able to homeschool your own children. So what does HSLDA do? Well, first and foremost, we work with New Mexico to help defend and protect homeschooling freedom here in New Mexico. One of my responsibilities as a state contact attorney is to help families here in New Mexico. Now, thankfully, I don't have to deal every single day with issues from New Mexico because New Mexico is a great state for homeschooling. One of my other states is New York. And yes, they both have new in the beginning of their state, but New York is probably as far away from New Mexico, not only geographically, but also homeschooling-wise. And so I spend a lot of time dealing and helping families in New York who want to be able to educate their children at home. Just to give you an example, New York requires a notice, and they require an individualized home instruction plan. They require 4 quarterly reports, an annual assessment, and all of that has to be submitted to the school district every year. And then once they do that, for them to get into college, they have to ask the school district to please write a letter confirming that we did all those things. So for those of you who may be coming from other states that have less requirements from New Mexico, I would say that New Mexico has a great homeschooling law, particularly when you look at other states. So what do? We work with Kate to continue to protect homeschooling freedom and advocate for that freedom. That starts by monitoring legislation, by putting on events like Cape at the Capitol. We also help families who decide to begin homeschooling, and they need help in removing their children from the public school. We help these families when local school officials tell them that they can't pull their children out, or that they need to get approval from their curriculum before they can begin. Yes, even in New Mexico, that occasionally happens. We also help defend homeschooling families when their decision to educate their children is questioned or challenged by social services or local school officials. Now, as a homeschool graduate, one of the things that I enjoy the most is helping other homeschool graduates. Over the years, we've had an opportunity in New Mexico to advocate on behalf of homeschool graduates after they've completed their high school education. Whether their homeschool education was challenged not so much now in college, but in employers or other institutions or agencies where homeschooling is considered a question. And what we do is help advocate that homeschooling is a valid, legitimate option, and that parents have the freedom to direct that education and to verify their child's completion of high school. So besides all those things that we do here in New Mexico, HSLDA is a national organization. So we help families all across the country. As I already said, I help a lot of families in New York. I also help families in Oklahoma, Kentucky, Florida, and what's the other state? Oregon. So as you can see, a lot of these states are scattered across the country, and it's my privilege to be able to help homeschooling families. So we defend the right to educate the children at home and provide practical homeschool advice and assistance through education consultants. Now, over the years, we've seen numerous examples of how homeschool families in their state capitals have protected homeschool freedom and built up those relationships with their legislators. Every year, we see both good bills and bad bills all across the country. Bills that would impact homeschooling laws or homeschooling freedom. Now, thankfully, homeschooling families have, on the whole, been able to protect our freedom across the country. And much of that is due to homeschool capital days like the Cape at the Capitol event today. Now, the most important thing that you've done today is building that relationship with your legislator. Legislators are people too, and they make decisions based upon what they know. Once again, what they're learning today is the strong and vibrant homeschooling community that you are and that you represent today. So thank you for your efforts today and your continued efforts to make New Mexico a great state for homeschooling. Now, one thing else that I'd like to just add and encourage you, if you do have time after the Cape at the Capitol event, some of you know that the PED is actually right across the street. And so if you want, you could go over there. You could just leave a note at the front desk, say, hey, I'm a homeschooling family, and I understand that the PED is trying to require homeschool families to provide instructional hours. And I just want to let you know that I'm against that decision. And so you can just leave a note. You don't have to go visit anybody. You can just go in, drop it off at the front desk, just to let them know that there are homeschoolers who are paying attention to what they're doing. And Kate has been working tirelessly these few months to get a meeting with the PED. They've been putting us off for a couple of months. So sometimes your attendance, your visit to the PED department may help encourage them to meet with us. We will be meeting with at least one PED official, but not anybody in the decision-making capacity later today. So again, thank you for your efforts. Thank you for your time today. And thank you for your